Heritage Open Days is England's largest community-led festival of history and culture, and it's all free. This year's theme is Roots, Networks, Connections. For our reading from the archives events, we pick documents which fall under a theme, which are then transcribed and recorded by a fantastic team of volunteers. All the documents today fall under the theme of Norfolk Routes.
PD 402/226, October 12th, 1876. My visit to Yarmouth. I have taken the train at Worstead and am travelling at a rapid speed through Wroxham over the Broad and marshes till we arrive at the station at Whitlingham, passing the asylum at Thorpe where the lunatics are confined. My prayers morning and night, the first and last, is to thank God for the use of our reason, and that we all may be possessed of that inestimable blessing to the latest hour. I stand on the platform and admire the river with the boats sailing to and fro, and the beautiful scenery opposite, thinking that behind them very trees at Crown Point that terrible act of suicide was committed, which brought grief and sorrow to hundreds of families and households throughout the whole country. But I must not stay to look no longer, as the train is up and we are off to Yarmouth. Arrived at the station, the man with the cab takes us, viz. Me and my wife, to our lodgings in the Wellesley Street, North Deans, to a house named Douro House, called so after the Marquis of Douro, descendant of the noble Duke of Wellington. The morning after my arrival here, I go for a ramble on the beach and the marine drive, which is very beautiful. Here are about 200 vessels riding at anchor, being wind-bound, destined to go to all parts of the world. I walk to the flag house on the beach, talks to the man who kindly lent me his telescope, and at the same time explains to me the different ships by their flags at the masthead. Here a French ship, Prussian, Dutch, Portuguese, and too many to name. Riding at anchor opposite here are the Trinity yacht and the Reverend's cutter opposite the Coastguard House, with its flagstaff standing in the front, with the fabulous creature mermaid at the base. Who ever saw such a monster alive, I never heard tell. I am now at the front of the Sailors' Home, that noble institution supported by the charity of feeling hearts for the comfort of the poor shipwrecked mariner, who is often carried in here almost dead. But here he is taken in and cared for by friends who act the part of the Good Samaritan. Now I ascend the stairs up into the museum. Here are handsome little ships, boats, and huge bones of the elephant, sharks' heads, and bones of large fish, and a great many stones, besides many curiosities too numerous to mention. This building is surmounted by a clock and 4 flying glass globes to tell the nature of the wind, and are lit up at night, the sight of which red lights looks beautiful. Here I stand on the jetty, looking at the men and boys fishing, but it appears to me to be only waste of time. They catch no fish, for they catch nothing whatever. Now I must ramble to the Wellington Pier, erected to the memory of the noble warrior, the Duke of Wellington, who on the morning after the Battle of Waterloo saw 40,000 lying dead like a vast army asleep. What a blessed period it will be when the nations shall learn war no more. The object to attract my attention now is the lofty monument on the Deans, erected to the memory of the great naval hero Nelson, who fought 124 battles in defence of his country and gained the laurels of honour. God grant he may be wearing a crown in heaven. Here I am sitting on an iron seat, looking at the fleet of vessels sailing to all quarters of the globe, laden with all kinds of merchandise for the comfort of man. They have my well-wishing that they may gain their haven in safety, and the men who man them, and finally they may gain the heavenly haven at last. Here are the boats are coming in, laden with beautiful herrings for our morning feast. God be thanked for such a luxury and appetites to enjoy them. Oh, what a place is Yarmouth Beach to visit in fine weather. Here's high and low, both rich and poor, all bustling together. I now am pushing through a row which splendid shops adorns. You must be careful how you walk, if you have tender corns. Out of the market-place I strolled, down of a row so narrow, and found it quite a job to squeeze, to pass a one-wheelbarrow.
In this holiday journal, Sir Robert Harry Inglis Palgrave talks of his experiences of holidaying in the east of England. Sir Robert was born in 1827, making him around 10 at the time of the journal. He was the third son of Sir Francis and Elizabeth Lady Palgrave, née Turner, who were abroad as their journal starts. Sir Robert later talks of them arriving back home, stating that he was very glad to hear you were safely arrived in England. In his journal we discover that he was travelling with Miss Maber, perhaps a nanny, and he talks of staying with his aunt and uncle. He writes,
August 10. My dear Mamma, there was a poor French person on the top of the coach who could not speak a word of English, and she brought a card to say so, and if Miss Maber had not spoken for her, she would have lost her box, for she could not tell the coachman where it was, and she had in her hand a blue satin bonnet pinned up in a piece of lining, which bonnet she left at Newmarket, and when coach was about to start she called out, Mon chapeau, and the coachman, not knowing what she meant, was going to drive off if Miss Maber had not asked him to stop, so the poor lady recovered her bonnet. We had a very pleasant journey, and saw that the harvest was begun in several places between Epping and Newmarket, though Uncle John thinks that it won't be begun in Norfolk for a fortnight or 3 weeks. August 30. My dear Mamma, our luggage had just come from Erstead, and therefore I am glad to say I can write journal again. You would never guess in what a strange manner we came here. Mr. Gunn was so kind as to send his carriage to convey us to Burr, but there we found no places in the little mail. Uncle John had told Miss Maber before we set out that if there were no room for us in the coach we should return to Erstead, and not take the carriage on to Yarmouth for fear of overtiring the horses. But Miss Maber thought it would be inconvenient to aunt and uncle to send us to Burr again, so she took the resolution to walk to Yarmouth. August 31. Yesterday we went to the beach and I built a fine fort. 1 the wall, 2 the chapel, 3 governor's house, 4 the citadel, 5 servants' house, 6 tower. When it had been allowed to stone a little, it was bombarded with little and big stones. After that I built another, which as far as I can recollect, like this. 1 the fort, 2 the servants' houses, 3 the ditch, 4 the wall. Our walk from Burr was a fine long one. We went along very merrily, with a trusty mountain guide, that is to say, an old gentleman who, like us not being able to find a place in the coach, was forced to walk, and who very kindly offered to shew us the way to Yarmouth. September 1. Today we went to the beach with Miss Maber, and I built a fine fort, but I had not quite time to finish it, but even as it was very large. Today Reggie bought a nice gun. September 2nd. Today Aunt Harriet was so kind as to get us some nice peas to shoot out of her guns.
This is an extract from the diaries of Reverend William Pelham Byrne, 1859 to 1901. He'd been a clergyman in Kensington, Italy, Oxford and Cornwall, but at this time was vicar of St Peter Mancroft in Norwich and chaplain at the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital. He was active in public life in Norwich, serving as a member of the school board from 1896 and on the Board of Guardians, of which he was chairman from 1898 until the time of his death. He married Mrs. Margaret Rate of Kensington and Dorking in 1890. They had 5 children, the last of whom was born only weeks before his death. His interests include mountaineering, he was a member of the Alpine Club, photography, cycling, shooting, fishing and golf, to name a few. Travel features strongly, and here we have selected a bicycle tour of Norfolk, visiting vicars and their churches along the way.
1896, May 25th. Started from Norwich, bicycling with Coatman and Long at 10:15. Rode through Drayton, Lenwade, Bintry and Fakenham, where we lunched at the Cross. The wind was against us. Stopped at Barsham and then the Old Hall, a fine Tudor house. At Little Walsingham called on Wansborough the vicar, who showed us the abbey and the church. Nothing left of the abbey except the east end of the church and the refectory. To the east of the church are some curious wishing wells. In the church nave is a beautiful seven-sacrament font standing in a Greek cross. Round the base are the four Latin fathers, St. Gregory with a dove whispering into his ear, and the four evangelists. After tea, we rode on to Great Walsingham Church, where are some beautiful benches, all with carved ends, poppy heads, and figures of apostles, etc. The church stands on high ground with a fine view to the northwest. We reached Wells about 5:45 p.m., where I stayed with Long's people, Sandwith and then Hammond at dinner. May 26th. Wells is a picturesque town about a mile from the sea on a tidal river. The tide covers the marshes between the town and the sea. There is a long dyke running down to the beach, enclosing a large extent of reclaimed land. Along the sand dunes, Lord Leicester has planted fir plantations. We went into the church, which has practically been rebuilt. About 11 a.m. we left the Longs and rode into Holcombe Park, an enormous enclosure about 11 miles round. The house is an ugly building of the last century. There is a large lake, a great roost of wild fowl. The views of the lake and surrounding park are lovely. We lunched with Sandwith the vicar and then went to the church. There is a beautiful recumbent figure of the late Countess of Leicester by Bohun. From the top of the church tower the view is magnificent. The woods all round in their first green foliage, the park stretching for miles to the south, and to the north the long line of marshes and sand dunes and the sea. On a clear day, Boston Stump is visible. Long having returned to Wells, Copeman and I rode on along the coast. A very good road with the wind behind us. At Deepdale we saw an interesting little church with a round tower. There is a Saxon font, and on three sides of the basin quaint reliefs of figures representing the seasons, some sowing, some reaping, etc. We reached Hunstanton about 4:30 p.m. and stopped at the schoolhouse to have tea with the Richmonds, then went on and took up our quarters at the Golden Lion. After breakfast we wandered along the sands. There is a curious formation of cliff, the upper part being chalk and the lower dark red sandstone. The line of division is about halfway up the face of the cliff, which stretches for about a mile immediately under the village. The view is most striking, the stretch of beach bounded on one side by the white and red cliff and on the other by the dark blue sea with gulls and terns flying along the edge. There are several pairs of ringed plovers flying about. We left Hunstanton at 10 a.m. and rode through Heacham, Snettisham and Dersingham and Sandringham. Below the park at Sandringham is a moor covered in heather. We found Canon Harvey at the rectory and after lunch walked across the park with him to West Newton Church and the club for the labourers in the village. Soon after 5 p.m. we took the road again and rode to Castle Rising. Harvey had given us a letter of introduction to Mr. Thursby, the vicar. The church is late Norman with a central tower. The arches of the tower are different styles, and the roof is crowned, the four arches being dog-toothed. There is a fine west front. To the west of the church stands the cross. The castle is a very large ruin surrounded by a dry ditch. Here Queen Isabella, the she-wolf of France, was imprisoned by Edward III. The rector showed us the almshouses with the chapel and treasury, this latter panelled with oak. The old women wear a dress of James I's time, a high-pitched beaver hat, red cloaks and blue dresses. We visit one woman who is 97 years old. We reached King's Lynn about 7 p.m. and went to some rooms found for us by the vicar E. Winter, with whom we dined in the evening. May 28th. Matins at St. Margaret's, a splendid church. In the choir there are beautiful clerestory windows and capitals of the main pillars. The organ has lately been restored at a cost of £1,400. There are two large brasses in the baptistry, one representing a mayor of Lynn and his two wives, and underneath this mayor entertaining King John at a peacock feast. The peacock is brought in with musical accompaniment. The southwest tower of the church is a fine specimen of late Norman. Above on the front there is a moon dial. Lynn is a faded town. All the streets with their great houses unoccupied or turned into offices suggest Ichabod without glory. The house in which Winter lived was once the dwelling of some rich merchant. It has a large hall with a balcony running round two sides of it and a courtyard. After breakfast, Winter started with us to ride through marshland. We made our way to the river, the Ouse, and on the way passed the custom house, a long Dutch-looking building. The ferry took us and our bicycles across to West Lynn, from which place Lynn looks very picturesque. The wharfs, the clock, with the shipping, with the spire of St. Nicholas, and the two towers of St. Margaret in the background. We passed through Clenchwarton and Terrington St. Clement, a large perpendicular church with a massive tower on the north side, standing a yard or two apart from the main building. There is a very remarkable font cover, which opens out as a triptych, the inside having pictures of our Lord's baptism and temptation. After leaving this village, we lost our way in the fen and had to drag our bicycles for several miles over roads too rough to ride on. Fortunately, we found labourers to guide us, and after much toil found the road again and reached Walpole St. Andrew. There the clergyman, I think his name is Smith, showed us the church. The chief point of interest is a hermit's cell against the west front. Half a mile brought us to Walpole St. Peter, and close to the church we found the vicarage, where we'd been asked to luncheon. The vicar is a Mr. McMichael, a regular whirlwind, and his wife a sister of G.H. Curzon. The church is a magnificent perpendicular building. Under the chancel there is a passage, as at St. Peter Mancroft, an old right-of-way, and the loop still remains in the wall where the farmers used to tie up their horses when they came to church. There is a great staircase leading up to the high altar. The font has a canopy like that at Terrington St. Clement, but no pictures inside. Mr. McMichael bicycled with us as far as West Walton, where Mr. Brown the rector showed us over the church. It is said that he received the living on condition that he should spend a part of the large income on restoring the church, but he's not carried out the agreement. At all events, the church is in a most ruinous state. The tower is a magnificent specimen of early English and stands about 40 yards from the church. The capitals of the columns are very beautiful, and there is a very perfect early English window in the south aisle, with well-preserved carving round it. The next church to which we came was Walsoken. Here the vicar is a drunkard. He sits in the village tavern with the farmers who have made him chairman of the Board of Guardians. The church is in good repair as far as the fabric is concerned, but ill kept. Behind the altar, in place of a cross, stands a paraffin lamp. The chancel and nave are Norman. There is a beautiful painted Norman arch at the entrance to the chancel. At the end of the south aisle is a perpendicular screen. There is a Seven Sacrament font. Another mile and we were in Wisbeach, our quarters for the night being with C. Copeman, a solicitor. Winter returned home. May 29th, on our way out, we saw the church at Wisbeach, a curious structure, with 4 aisles and a remarkable intersection of arches on the north side, where the principal aisle was the chancel. C. Copeman rode with us as far as Downham Market, 14 miles of wonderfully good road. After leaving Downham Market, we stopped at Southery Vicarage, where Copeman's brother-in-law, Mr. Hall, is vicar. When we came out from the vicarage, the sky to the north was flush with clouds and a thunderstorm seemed imminent, so we rode as hard as we could into Littleport, where we visited with another brother of Copeman's, the doctor. He came with us in the afternoon to Ely, where I took the train back to Norwich.
This journal was written by Mr. Martin of Pladstow. It details an excursion to Cromer in September 1825 with his wife and daughter. They travelled by the steam packet Hero from London to Great Yarmouth, then by a steam vessel to Norwich, before getting on a coach to travel to Cromer, where they stayed at the New Inn for a fortnight. It reads:
Wednesday, the 7th of September 1825. Embarked at 7 in the evening at Custom House Lower Stairs on board the Hero steam packet. of 350 tons, carpenter's measurement 242 register, the difference being abated for this room in which are her 2 engines, each of horses' power, and bound for North Yarmouth. My wife and daughter accompanying me, and our servant attending us. The usual bustle with watermen, wherries, etc. at the stairs. A steam packet arrived while we were waiting, and added another to the many noble vessels of this description now riding, or departing, or arriving at moorings off the Custom House and the Tower. What an entire new scene this from anything known only 10 years since. I remember but a few months since going to the riverside to see a vessel moved rapidly by steam as a novelty, and much interested was I and 10,000 more. And now a steam-going vessel is no more a wonder than is a London wherry on the Thames. Steam vessels now go from London to Margate, Ramsgate, Yarmouth, Scarborough. One of upwards of 500 tons has already departed full of passengers for Calcutta. We had during the morning a sudden alarm from an accident to the starboard wheel. The balls or rivets of one of the iron places had worked loose and permitted the plate to fly partly off. This, with the velocity and power of the wheel, came in contact with the upper part of the paddle box, the boards of which were instantly torn away and were driven in various directions. The engine was ordered to be stopped. The engineer and even the stokers came in a throng, hurrying to inquire the cause of the clatter. The passengers, especially the females, soon imagined a calamitous blow-up and more than danger follow. But the cause being quickly ascertained, the remedy was immediately applied, and in 10 minutes we were again on our voyage as if no interruption had taken place.
The log of the Snowflake is a handwritten account of a journey on the Norfolk Broads in 1935. The log contains photographs and drawings of places of interest along the route, beginning at Wayford Bridge and including Acle, Great Yarmouth, Reedham, Fritton Lake, Ranworth Broad and Ludham. These extracts cover 2 days in September 1935.
Fritton Lake to Somerleyton, Wednesday, September the 11th. The mate was awakened by the loud quack of the ducks, who had again come to visit us, and found that it was nearly 9 o'clock. We got up, made our morning tea, and the skipper got off the covers and then went down the bridge to the bridge in the dinghy for milk, butter and eggs. Meanwhile the mate stowed the bunks and shaved. The skipper, on his return, scrambled some eggs, which are excellent. The crew washed up together and then set sail and shoved off. There was very little wind and the tide was against us. After less than half a mile, the skipper decided to moor up, which we did at the point where the Waveney is joined by the new cut. We then set off in the dinghy. The mate took a snap of the skipper sailing her, sailing down to the bridge, mooring up at the Staithe. We walked along the road we had taken last night to the Jolly Anglers at Fritton, where we had a short rest. Then to the interesting old Norman church with a round tower and apsidal chancel. We walked on across a field and paid 6pence each to go down to Fritton Lake, or Decoy, a most charming sheet of water surrounded by trees. It was a glorious day, very hot and sunny, and the mate was glad that he had on his blue shirt, sleeveless. Back to the Jolly Anglers, and the skipper's pulse not being too good, we went for another short rest and to take in fuel. When we got back to St. Olave's, we went to see the ruins of an Augustinian priory, which were quite interesting. The undercroft of the refectory, a sort of crypt, being good with a groined roof. The skipper rowed us back in the dinghy to Snowflake, hard work, and we were soon busy preparing our midday meal, about 1:30. Vegetable soup, herrings, biscotte and cheese, and the mate enjoyed some green figs. We rested, slowly washed up and housemaided, and then lazed in the stern sheets, waiting for the tide to turn. The sun was baking hot, and we were very comfortable doing a crossword, not with great brilliance or success. At 4 o'clock we had our tea and again waited. At 5 we cast off, but it was no good, the tide being too strong and the wind too light. We never really got moving, but drifted to and fro from bank to bank, and the mate remarked that we should soon have to downmast for St. Olave's Bridge. We moored up again, having lost 200 yards, and again watched the tide. At 5:30 we again made a start, and in 10 minutes were back at the point. The wind dead ahead and very fitful. However, we gradually tacked up and got through the swing bridge, Haddiscoe, and then the river bending to the right. We got along really well, although the wind was very light, and as we neared Somerleyton it died away altogether. During the last half hour the mate peeled potatoes and carrots and started the primus. We made for a little creek, but were warned off it by an angler, although it was marked as a moorage on our map. So we went down a few yards and moored to the left bank. In the excitement of the moment, that clumsy fellow the mate knocked the saucepan over and broke a tumbler. The skipper sent him ashore to get some milk and buy a tumbler. It was now just after 7. The mate walked off but had to return for the milk can, and the skipper put him ashore on the other side of the dyke, which made a shorter walk of it. The walk up quite a hill to the village was dull, a flat row of brick cottages facing a large brickworks with tall and ugly chimneys. At the co-op, a tin of cream and a tumbler were procured, and a further walk of 300 yards found a farm where the milk can was filled. On his return, a shout of "Ahoy there!" brought the skipper in the dinghy. Supper was ready, and a very good supper it was. Steak guinea pie with mashed potatoes and carrots, followed by loganberries and cream. The offer of biscuit and cheese received no response. Washing up and clearing away was taken in hand, and pipes got going. The mate remarked that the worst of this ship was that he could never find anything. The skipper retorted with, "That seems rather like home, rude fellow." Whilst the skipper got the covers on, the mate wrote up the log. We were in the cabin for this meal, as it was coolish. The full moon in a perfectly clear sky was marvellous, but this is the least attractive spot we have struck so far. The skipper made a rice pudding for tomorrow as a relish to the remains of the loganberries. One good thing about this spot is that we are absolutely alone. Nice and snug, with all our covers on, we made our tea, and then the skipper got the bunks made up and we turned in at 9:30. Via Oulton to Reedham, Thursday, September the 12th. The night was very still, and the only disturbance was an occasional train, which made a tremendous rumbling over the bridge nearby, sounding as if immediately over our heads. We had a very good night, and the mate woke the skipper at 7 sharp. He, however, elected to lie in a bit longer. The mate got up at 7:45 and started the primus for the early cup of tea. The skipper busied around getting covers off and everything ready for a quick start. At 8:30 we pushed off, hoisted sail, and were soon through the swing bridge, which opened for us. This day started with a chapter of accidents. The mate was ordered by the skipper to prepare and cook breakfast whilst he sailed the ship. So the primus was lit, and frying pan got out, and the pleasant sound of frizzling bacon was heard. The mate, sad to relate, broke his egg, not into the frying pan, but on the deck. Most of it was rescued with fish slice. 5 minutes later, cutting himself a slice of bread, he steered with his behind, the hank hit the handle of the frying pan, and egg number 2 was on the deck. Otherwise, breakfast was a successful meal. We enjoyed some good sailing. The breeze was strong from the southeast, and it was most enjoyable. In an hour we reached the Oulton dyke and sailed down it to Oulton Broad, a fine expanse of water, and we bowled merrily across it and moored up to the quay at the yacht station at 10:45, shortening sail most smartly as we came alongside. Then we pottered about, had our elevenses, and walked ashore at 11:30. We found the post office, but alas, there was only one letter from Sicily for the skipper. The young lady informed us that the letters were probably at Oulton post office, this being Oulton Broad post office, 2 miles away. The mate sent a postcard to Postmaster Oulton asking for letters to be forwarded on to Yarmouth, but the skipper decided to walk to Oulton to fetch them, so off he set. The mate carried the provisions back to the yacht and then went to the pub for a fresh supply of beer. Here he got one up on the skipper. He then busied himself washing up the breakfast things and tidying up, and had just sat himself down to enjoy a pipe and the Morning Post when the skipper returned, having walked all the way to Lowestoft, but had failed to find Oulton. He had enjoyed a good walk in the hot sun. Later in the day it leaked out that he had returned by bus. It was now 1 o'clock, and we ate our lunch in the stern sheets, bully beef and loganberries, with the rice pudding, which was jolly good. At 1:40 we set sail and had a glorious run before the wind, the mate taking the tiller and doing very well. We were back at Somerleyton in well under an hour, doing at times 7 to 8 knots. Many of the yachts had reefs in. When we reached the swing bridge at Haddiscoe, St. Olave's, the red flag was up, so we had to turn and tack about. When the flag was lowered, we turned to go through the bridge, but owing to the main sheet jamming, we were unable to pay off before the wind, and hit the bank with a tremendous thump. Luckily, no major damage was done, though the mate's knee came against the cabin door and wrenched it off its hinges. The mate was ordered forward to lie on his stomach and see if any damage had been done to the bows. We quickly sailed through the bridge, and the mate put things straight in the cabin once more. Now we were into the cut, and signalled for the lifting bridge to be opened for us. A large net on a pole was presented for the charge of 2 shillings and 6pence. On the bank, an angler, rude person, shouted to the skipper, "Hi, you want a barber," although the beard is not yet really flapping in the breeze. We flew down before the wind and soon entered the Yare, turning up to the left towards Reedham. The red flag at the bridge was up, so we tacked about below for 6 or 7 minutes. Just before we left the cut, the skipper ordered the foresail to be shortened. Tacking about, he ordered it up again, which the mate did to the best of his ability. When ordered to lower, later, the skipper said he had never seen such a bunch of bananas in all his life. He had to go forward and disentangle while the mate steered. We moored up to the left opposite the Lord Nelson. The Norwich Belle, and may her shadow rapidly diminish, had passed us at the bridge loaded with about 300 disgusting trippers of every denomination and breed. Her skipper moved us on, much to our indignation, saying that he could not turn. This was nonsense, and we ought to have told him to go some other place. We did move to a rather damp bank, but with a charming view of the village across the stream and fairly well to ourselves. Shortened sail and had our tea a little before 4 o'clock. We had had a marvellous sail, and the day had been perfect, with hot sun and a spanking breeze. After tea, while the mate washed up, the skipper furled sail and put on the covers. Then he prepared a stew, and the mate wrote up the log. At 6:15 we crossed in the dinghy and went to the Lord Nelson to take in fuel. All this time the trippers had been making the day hideous with "the more we are together," and we were thankful to see them go. The skipper made at intervals a few choice remarks as to what he thought of them. On the return, cooking was proceeded with. It was a lovely evening with a glowing sunset, but rather stormy looking. Supper of an excellent mutton stew, followed by biscuit and cheese, went off without a hitch, and nothing was upset. Afterwards the mate washed up, and the skipper put on the after cover. A large sea-going tramp passed, making a considerable wash. The tiller swung across, and the door of the stern cupboard, which was on the counter, was knocked off into the river. Luckily the skipper spotted it drifting away upstream, so he nipped into the dinghy and rowed after it to the rescue. Then we had tea, made by the skipper, and the mate wrote some postcards, one to the midship maid with instructions about joining the ship on Tuesday. Cabin very snug and warm, with little lamp and candle to light us, and by 10 o'clock we were in our bunks.